Because you can edit it, right?
How are you doing, Miss English?
I'm well, how are you?
Oh, doing good.
Good.
So I brought you in here so we could talk about what I observed when I came to your class the other day.
Okay.
When I came in, you guys had already gotten started, and y'all were comparing and contrasting characters from multiple short stories.
Yes.
Correct? Before we go any further, I'm assuming they read those short stories prior to the day I came in?
They did.
Okay.
And then, I don't know if you noticed, but each of the groups had certain short stories. Like, no group had the same short stories to deal with.
So how did they go about picking or did you pick those stories for them?
They picked them. I let them choose, but they knew that, well, in fact, some of them wanted to draw it out of a hat, but we just kind of compromised, and if they wanted to draw it out of a hat, they could. If not, they just voted or whatever.
Okay. Well, when I came in, you guys were talking about the comparing and contrasting, talking about what that was and how they could go about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I found really interesting about yours was y'all were using Venn diagrams
Yes.
to do that,
Mm-hmm.
which I've seen multiple times in multiple different classrooms, but you were using hula hoops. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, my little middle school students get very antsy. And so I just thought we could take care of the focus of that day, but do something that gave them the chance to get up and move. And it also took some of the pressure off of my special services students,
Mhm.
because it just didn't seem as intimidating as sitting down with paper and pencil and trying to complete an activity. So for them to be able to get up and move and put something somewhere, if the group didn't agree with it, they could pick up that card, move it to another spot, and then the group agreed with
Okay.
it. So they saw success immediately.
Okay, and when you mentioned your special ed students,
Yes, sir.
how many of those do you typically have in class, or in that class in general, how many?
I had 4 in that
Okay.
class.
And so, I mean, with all your lessons, I'm assuming you differentiate between things. So in that instance, you felt that being able to move around, they of course were working in groups, that helped those students?
It did. And then the main group had to come up with 5 ways they were different and 3 ways they were alike, the
Okay.
characters in the stories. My special ed students had to come up with 2 ways they were alike and 1 way that they were, 2 ways they were different and 1 way they were alike.
Okay. When I came in, everybody seemed to be working. When you have your groups, well, let me ask you this, how did you go about deciding who was in groups?
This time I selected the groups. A lot of times I'll let them draw numbers or we'll count. There's several different ways that we form groups. In this particular case, I wanted a strong student with a struggling student. And it worked out where we kind of had 1 strong, 1 struggling, and then 2 that were average, I'll say average students.
Okay. Talking about that still,
Yes, sir.
do you ever have problems where your student that struggles when he's in groups just kind of refuses to do anything?
Yes, and that's another reason I liked this, because it wasn't like, oh, we have to come up with all this stuff and I'm just gonna sit here for a while. Because they wrote something on a card, and I even let them draw a picture if they wanted to. Like if they thought the character was maybe an angry person, they could draw an angry face and then put that in the correct slot. And then again, they could talk with their group mates, and if they weren't sure about a character, they could talk to their group mate and then put it down on the card and put it in place.
Okay. It was a pretty positive classroom environment. Everyone seemed to be working. I didn't really see any major problems. There was one thing in particular that I'm not gonna say it was concerning, but things you might look for in the future, was when you were moving around the room the whole time, but when you would stop to work with one particular group, sometimes you had your back turned to people and they got off task behind you. You were good about noticing that happening, but being on the DAP, sometimes things can escalate quickly.
Yes, they can.
So, but I've suggested to other teachers, possibly if you're gonna work with the group, and this one it's kind of hard. I've mentioned this to teachers that are just where the students are working from their desk, pulling them to a general area to where you can see everybody while you're working with the group.
Yes.
This one could be a little trickier since they were working in groups, but I mean, that's the one thing I've noticed, or I noticed during that time, that I would just be careful with.
Okay, I appreciate that.
How did you feel about what all the how the lesson went?
Well, one of the things I felt good about was how the special ed students felt successful, and they were proud of what they did. They didn't feel different.
Mm-hmm.
They because I selected the groups, they worked with some people that they might not normally work with, and so they sort of formed some companionship that way also.
So you already talked to him about the way you differentiate. I can't get that word out. Your lessons, and I mean that's especially on this campus. We have students from all over
Yes, sir.
the town. I had to leave a little before the end. Assessment wise, how did that work? Or I saw them when they were working on the, comparing, contrasting, using the hula hoops and the Venn diagrams. Did they have an assignment, prior or after that? And then my next question would be exit ticket wise, do you do that? And if so, how did that work?
Yes, we did an exit ticket because the actual activity took most of the class. By the time we had explained, what the expectations were, the activity itself took most of the class because we sat down and each group told about their characters. They didn't tell everything that they had there, but they told a short little snippet of what they had done. By that time, class was nearly over, so for their exit ticket, each student wrote they could choose whether they wanted to say something that the two characters were alike or where the two characters were different, and then they used one situation from the story as text evidence as to why they felt like they were alike or different.
And that was done individually?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then the next day we did a writing assignment based on the activity.
Okay, and before, I was gonna talk to you about the writing assignment, but having so many different short stories,
Yes, sir.
did that complicate anything? When because you said that they kind of talked about it to the rest of the class. I mean, did that throw it off in any way?
For the ones that had not been here, since we get new students every single day, yes, for some of them it was difficult. For some of those students, it was their first day in class.
Okay.
So they had to work with their group and find out what was going on in the story, and with some of them, they could kind of, if they were good enough readers, they could kind of just scan through the story a little bit. Otherwise, they talked with their group and just kind of wrote it down. So we have to make allowances for when it's their first day in class. I mean, obviously they have no clue.
Yeah. And you had mentioned, so y'all did the activity with the hula hoops, and then you mentioned a writing assignment before the exit ticket?
No, after the exit.
After the following day?
Yes.
And do they all participate? How does that work?
That is something I struggle with. I have a lot of reluctant writers, and they're not just my special services students. And so a lot of them just don't want to write. And I've tried to make the writing assignments relative to them, but you can't always.
Yeah.
And I've tried to make them short enough that they don't feel like it's this massive 3-page essay, but I still had some that struggled to even get a paragraph out.
And what do you typically ask for on the writing, like half page, page?
This one was just a page. I just wanted them to cover, again, if they chose on the exit ticket to compare, I asked them on the writing assignment to contrast.
Okay.
And we had some more specifications, but the main focus on that writing assignment was using text evidence. So they had copies of the stories with them, and I had them highlight some of the areas that they thought would give them some ideas. After the highlighting, they didn't want to write it down.
Okay. quick suggestion, maybe in situations like that where you have the student that's reluctant to write things, maybe partner them up, do like a partner write. I mean, it could be from the same group that they were in. I mean, I guess in this situation, it would have to be the same group because they had the same characters. But I mean, that may be something, even if, you know, that student that's reluctant wants to tell the other student what it is they want to write and they can write it. That way, they're getting their thoughts out. I mean, it may be because they're embarrassed or, you know, handwriting may be poor. But this way, you got someone writing for them, but they're still getting their thoughts out.
Yes. And I thought about letting them write on Chromebooks, but since our middle school students aren't allowed to use Chromebooks, this is a good suggestion. I appreciate that.
Not a problem at all. And again, I mean, I thought it was a great class. The only one thing that I would work on is just, and you did good, it's just being on this campus, things can change
In a heartbeat.
in a heartbeat.
Yes,
So
they can.
just making sure you're aware of what's going on around you.
I appreciate that, and that is something I've struggled with because I mean, my eyesight is not the best, and I do sometimes have to get close to see what they're writing or whatever, and I have noticed that when I'm involved with a student or a group of students, then, you know, more things happen beyond me, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, and when I was in there, it wasn't anything serious. It was just
But it could
the
be.
conversations changed and they weren't really on task. But
I agree with you.
But that's I mean, other than that, I mean, everyone was engaged, you know, and seemed to enjoy the lesson.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I appreciate you and look forward to coming back to class.
Well, thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate your help.
Not a problem.